Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter. We got one or two things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter here. Last time we were on with Andre Martiana of the YouTube saw fit. I guess we said something they were very unhappy with about the Europeans, and they canned our video, but it's still up on Rumble, and a lot of people are looking at it. All right, Scott, let's start here. Everybody, if you want to find out about all of Scott's good works, just go to scottritter.com. Scott, what's happening with your Russia House project before we get rolling?
Well, I mean, it's going on this week. We're publishing an interview with Boris Rogin. He's a part of this class of this new category of war journalists, the military bloggers. This is sort of an art form that has been developed since 2014, when the conflict in the Donbass first began. You sort of had this wild west of information management because the Donbass was no man's land. It wasn't Russia, so Russian law didn't apply. It wasn't Ukraine, so Ukrainian law. It was just sort of this free-for-all. And so these military bloggers started going down there. These were people who participated in combat operations and then reported about it, developed a reputation, developed a following. And then once the special military operation began, they moved into more classic journalism, but it's what I call gonzo journalism, sort of out of the Hunter S. Thompson school of reporting, where it's not you objectively, with free of bias reporting on a story, but you become the story. You are there on the front lines. You're the one receiving fire. You're the one doing this firsthand reporting, and it also, it brings a sort of a realism to the war that's invaluable reporting from that standpoint. But it's also reporting that's done outside of the framework of mainstream Russian media. If you're with RT or Izvestia or Krasnaya Zvezda or Komsomolskaya Pravda, these other outlets, you're state sponsored media. I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't speak, but you are subjected to some controls. There is an element of censorship applied. Hell, we do it here in the United States. We call it embedded reporting. But these war bloggers, they're out there just doing their thing. They grew up free of that, and they're doing their thing. And the Russian government's been struggling to figure out how to deal with these guys. And what they've done is I think they've taken the approach of keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Not that they're viewing them as enemies, but they've embraced them. Vladimir Putin has actually invited them to the Kremlin. They've engaged in conversations. I think what they've done is they said, you can do what you want. Remember, these are people who reported during the Wagner crisis. They were sympathetic to Yevgeny Prigozhin, and they were critical of Shoigu and Gerasimov. A little less of Putin, because you don't last long if you're critical of Putin in an insurrectionist standpoint. But these are people that have put out very critical reporting of the Russian special military operation, and the Kremlin has said continue. Just don't give away national secrets. If you're on the front lines with a unit, you don't get to say what the unit is, their commander, their strength, their weaknesses. But you can report from the front lines. And it's interesting because it's created this unique media environment for the special military operation. And it also applies on the Ukrainian side, although there are more restrictions. But there's, the war reporters from the Ukrainian side. This has brought this war home to the world through these video reporting. People, you're a journalist, you're going down there, you're embedding with a drone unit. Next thing you know, you're getting the live drone feed of it smacking into a truck full of human beings, and you get to see the fear in the eye of the person right before the drone hits them and blows them up. I think some people complained about America's wars in Iraq, et cetera. That even with all these embedded reporters, it was a heavily censored war. It was a war that we never really got to experience because the government didn't want the American people to see what was really happening. You got to give the Russian government kudos here, because this war is ugly, it's deadly, it's brutal, it's not perfect. Mistakes are being made, and they're being reported by people like Boris Roshin, who is a military. So this is an article about. I interviewed him. We published an article about this. That's what we're doing this week, and every week we just pick a different facet of Russian society and Russian life to cover through an interview, through an article. And the idea is to bring this multifaceted experience to an American audience, to a Western audience, so that they can better understand Russia. We're on the cusp of hopefully having peace break out all over. But in order for this peace to be successful, we have to inoculate the Americans against the Russophobia that they've been subjected to for the past 4 or 5 decades. And I view the Russia House as part of this inoculation process.
And how can people become a part of it? How can they see it, join?
Well, it is a subscription-based service. It's and one of the reasons is that because of the current situation, even though we're moving towards improving relations, it's impossible to have a partnership with a Russian entity that where I can provide underwriting for it, etc. So this is the Telegram channel is owned by a Russian. It's a Russian Telegram channel. It's in partnership with me, but I have no financial stake in this. But in order to keep this going, there has to be income that's brought in, and so it's a subscription-based service. And the purpose of this is to pay the expenses that are associated with the production of this, and to we have to pay translators, we have to pay the producers, the editors, and this this doesn't happen for free. This is high quality stuff. This is good, high quality production values and unique content, but it doesn't happen for free. So it is a subscription based service, but it's not designed for me to go to the Bahamas. It's designed to sustain what I think is a critically important information vector for the American public, for the Western public.
All right, everybody, go to scottritter.com for more information on Russia House. All right, Zelensky, he seems to be in deep and serious guana right now. After the, clearly, I mean, the guy's, too big for his britches, and he's, at the White House, that whole thing goes down. He's going back. He's hugging Keir Starmer. Now the word we're hearing is that the Trump people are talking to others about potentially who may be the next leader of Ukraine. Don't sound like a good omen for based on the history of the United States and puppet leaders. I'd say that's not a good omen for Zelensky. What say you, Scott Ritter?
Well, again, I think we need to put this in a broader context. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, just came out and acknowledged straight up that the United States is in a proxy war against Russia. I'll just say that one more time so your audience understands. The United States of America is in a proxy war against Russia. A nuclear power is in a proxy war against a nuclear power. And this is a war that was brought on by the Biden administration, but was prefaced by decades of policy designed to strategically defeat Russia. But now it's come to a head. And if you allow this conflict to go along the natural course, there will be a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, and we all die. And fortunately, we have a president who said, I don't want that. That's not the direction I want. And there's no reason for us to be going against Russia. This is all just a manufactured nonsense by a military industrial commission, congressional, conglomerate that needs conflict in order to justify spending taxpayer money. It's a self-licking ice cream cone, and the only end of it, it doesn't even taste good. But you got to keep licking it, and then eventually you get to the chewy center and you blow up and die. So we're trying to stop this, but the important thing is that we acknowledge that we are in a state of war with Russia. which means that we have to bring this conflict to a termination that's acceptable to Russia. We're not, Russia isn't going to surrender. Russia is fighting this because this is an existential issue for Russia. And one of the things that Russia's put out several terms that have been non-negotiable. They can be broadly defined, but they're non-negotiable. No NATO membership. Well, we've seen the Trump administration acknowledge this. The Trump administration's gone a step further and acknowledged that it was the expansion of NATO into Ukraine that caused this conflict. The Trump administration has also said that the Russians have legitimate national security interests in what goes on in Ukraine, and these should be respected. Russia has said that there will be demilitarization. That means that no NATO forces at all in Ukraine, no NATO influence, no NATO at all, nothing. Lavrov doubled down on that today, saying there will be no NATO peacekeepers or any military presence in Ukraine. If anybody shows up, they'll be treated as the enemy. So demilitarization and denazification. This is a tricky one because what does it mean, denazification? Well, actually, we know exactly what it means because the Russians spelled it out in the Istanbul communique. It is a fundamental change in the constitutionality of Ukraine so that a new constitution will be drafted that outlaws these parties, bans the right wing, makes Bandera illegal, and also protects the right of the Russian-speaking population, their religious, protects their religion. The Zelensky government and the nationalists have been attacking the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They've been attacking Russian speakers. They've been destroying monuments to Russian culture, not just the Soviet monuments, which are very important, by the way, to the Russian people. Deeply insulting to have the Ukrainians come in and destroy monuments to the Red Army that defeated Nazi Germany, that occupied this and killed 27 million of their fellow citizens, but also to Russia's past. There's the infamous removal of Catherine the Great's statue in Odessa. That it's just a frontal assault on Russia. That will end. That has to end. Now, how does this happen? I will tell you that Zelensky just came out. I mean, you remember we've had this seesaw. He wasn't going to sign the deal. He insulted the Secretary of Treasury. Oh, he changed his mind. He's flying to Washington, D.C. He's going to sign the deal, but there's a blow up in the White House. He leaves. He's told to apologize. He's ready to apologize. He sends a letter to Trump. Trump reads the letter on national TV. Then Zelensky turns around and says, screw that letter. I'm not doing any of that. We're not doing anything. Now I'm meeting with the Europeans today to talk about how we can go to war with Russia permanently. So let me just put it this way again. If Marco Rubio says that the United States is in a proxy war against Russia that the United States is trying to end, and that the go-between, the proxy, is Ukraine, and we want this war to end, Zelensky isn't part of that equation. Zelensky will never be part of that equation. He's playing stupid games right now. He's just making matters worse. But Zelensky is out, finished. Now the question is, what happens? I think there's universal agreement between the Trump administration, and the Russians that there have to be elections. But the elections mean different things in different places. There might be some in the Trump administration that believe that an election could empower people like Poroshenko, former president, Timoshenko, former president. From the Russian perspective, that doesn't solve anything. Because Poroshenko, he's the one who lied about Minsk. Timoshenko's a nationalist. The Russians won elections, but they have their person, Medvedchuk, the former Ukrainian politician who was arrested, beaten, tortured, then exchanged for the Nazis, Azov guys who were captured in Mariupol. He's currently in Russia, heading up a Ukrainian government in exile. So one of the big tricks that's going to be played over the course of the coming weeks and months is getting Ukraine to hold elections. That's inevitable. That will happen. But B, getting the elections to produce the result that Russia needs for there to be a lasting peace. Russia is not going to allow a continuation of a Ukrainian government that has been involved in lying and building up and deceiving and stuff. This war has to end. And I think the United States agrees that. But to end, you need to solve all the problems. And to solve the problems of Ukraine, you can no longer have Ukrainian nationalists or those linked to Ukrainian nationalists, those linked to the past, governing. You need new government that is pro-Russian and is willing to undertake the constitutional changes necessary to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine to the satisfaction of the Russians, who, by the way, have won this war.
You know, I read now there's, I think, what, 240,000 Ukrainian refugees in the U.S. Trump's going to end their legal status, which means, I guess, they're out of here. It seems to me now the Trump team, you pissed off the wrong guy. He's going to keep punching. Every couple days, he's going to yank another rug out from under him. Every few days, you hear the Trump team's going to do this. I'm hearing rumors they may open RT. I don't know, but those are rumors. I'm hearing all kind of rumors. They're looking at various Russian relaxing sanctions, et cetera. It seems to me that they are on that now, after what happened, the Trump team is on a path. And the path is, every few days, we're going to do something else. You don't get the message, we're doing something else. You don't get the message, we'll just keep it. That's the way it seems to me. Those Ukrainian refugees, I think, they're you know, and they're here. Here's the thing about it, and I think one of the reasons that is happening. The other day, there was a bunch of Ukrainians at the White House, you know, protesting. Caleb Maupin, I talked to him. He was there. You might have seen the video, and they were protesting on behalf of Trump, Zelensky, holding up signs. There was some guy who was an American they were arguing with him. I don't know if that got back to Trump, but I think they're heading back to Ukraine. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Well, it was interesting. I interviewed this week a Ukrainian historian, media person who specializes in the history of the Banderist movement, of Ukrainian nationalism, etc. And he said that because I talked about, you know, the history of America working with the Banderists, and it's clear, we know that the CIA funded the organization Ukrainian nationalists and the their military wing from 1945 until, you know, the mid 1950s, and then after the Soviets crushed this insurgency, we continued to fund the organization Ukrainian nationalists up until 1990. The CIA, direct funding, and the purpose was to empower these nationalists to create a movement inside Ukraine that would be used to weaken the Soviet Union and later Russia. The CIA stopped the funding of the washing machine going bonkers in the background, but we'll just have to let it do its thing for another minute or two.
We can barely hear it here, actually.
You can't hear it?
A little bit much.
Yeah, for me, it's just overwhelming, but it just stopped. Either the machine broke or it figured out what happened and it fixed itself. But welcome to my life.
Yeah.
But the CIA did this, but what's not known, and then I think there's a general recognition that the CIA was involved in the Orange Revolution of 2004, 2005, and that there was heavy CIA involvement in the 2014 Maidan. But what's not too understood is what happened between the moment when the CIA dropped the official funding for the organization Ukrainian nationalists and the Orange Revolution, that middle ground. And this guy said, you know, what was happening is that you have Ukrainian nationalists in diaspora. At the end of the Second World War, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who were Banderists fled Ukraine. They were put in these called internal displacement camps, IDPs. They were internally displaced persons, put in these camps for 4 to 5 years. And around 1950, the decision was you have to get these guys out. But these camps became Banderist strongholds. I mean, there's interviews with American guards, and they said, you know, every morning we'd come out and there'd be bodies. These were the people that were executed by the Banderists. They were cleaning house. If there was any attempt to create political opposition to the Banderist movement, they came together and they killed these people. It was a law. They were a law unto themselves inside this camp. And the bodies there, we just take the body, and we never asked any questions. He said, we didn't investigate it. We didn't do anything. It was their problem. So these camps became strongholds of the Banderist ideology. And then in 1950s, we dispersed them, largely to America, where they fell in on existing Ukrainian diasporas, and Canada, where they fell in on existing diasporas. And these are highly organized people who intimidate, and they took over. They captured the diaspora movement. And so the diasporas, the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States, is a Banderist organization. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. 100% across the board, Banderist supporting people. And so he said, we came, USAID, where we heard that before, funded these trips where they come and they take Ukrainian influencers in the 1990s, and they bring them to the United States. When they arrived in the United States, they were met by a delegation. Each one of them had a diaspora Banderist attached to them who became their shadow. And they were taken to the White House. They were taken to the Pentagon. They were taken to the State Department. They were wined and dined. And basically, they were told that whatever they're doing in Ukraine must align with what the Banderists and the American government are working on, that they have to make sure that what they're working on aligns with this. So it was basically the United States branding, imprinting Banderism back into Ukraine. Because they had been largely suppressed, confined to the Western areas. But what this guy said, he said, "Look, I'm from Kharkov, and the Azov battalion didn't come from Lvov; it came from Kharkov. These aren't the Western Ukrainians; these are Eastern Ukrainians who got radicalized, and the vehicle of the radicalization was the ideology being imprinted back on Ukraine through USAID using." All this. And so what I bring this up, understand that this diaspora that's in America today, they're American citizens, and I believe in free speech and all that, but they understand that they are adherents to Banderist ideology. Right down here in Ellenville, New York, they have a camp where every summer they run 2 or 3 iterations, hundreds of bright young Ukrainian American children go through the camps where they put on their brown uniforms, and they end up doing a torchlight march, holding up portraits of Stepan Bandera, singing "Stepan Bandera is our father." They have a hill monument called Heroes Hill. Bandera, Roman Shukovich, one of the worst people in the world, a mass murderer, and other, the ideological founders of the Banderist movement are all there. They're heroes of this movement. These are Americans who worship a Nazi, who killed Jews by the tens of thousands, who killed Poles by the hundreds of thousands, who killed Russians by the hundreds of thousands. And yet, not only are they here, they're not a distinct minority. They are the ones who have taken over Ukraine policy in the United States. Anybody who has Ukrainian policy as in their bio, over the course of the past several decades, is a Banderist. Just trace it. Victoria Nuland, Vindman, anybody. They're all Banderas, because you can't get into that club unless you go through the diaspora. That's the reality. And so, now we have he said they created this ideology here. Recently, the 75th Air Mobile Brigade, which is an elite combat unit of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, said that that the United States will pay a price for what it's done to Ukraine, and that they will mobilize the Ukrainian diaspora to begin punishing America. So now we may call them Americans, these Ukrainian Banderists, but now when you go through, they all go through these camps, PLAST camps, PLAST. This is the Ukrainian scouting program. It's a 100% Banderist ideological brainwashing program. And they go in there and they have all the scouting things, community, honor, trust, They get down to, number 8, absolute loyalty and discipline and adherence to the movement. Wait a minute, absolute? Is that more like absolute Trump's Constitution? Are these people loyal to America? Are they loyal to Bandera? And we know the answer. They are loyal to Bandera 100%. So now that we're being told they're going to mobilize these people to begin launching attacks, and it may be tongue in cheek, but NAFO is on the web right now saying stock up on tires. We know what those are to create the barriers. Stock up on this. We have the formula for Molotov cocktails, and let's begin. Let's rock. We've been told now by the Ukrainian military and by supporters of the Ukrainian movement that they're going to weaponize the Ukrainian American diaspora to commit acts of terrorism in the United States to punish America for the decisions that have been made regarding Ukraine. So now we have to set that up. So now we have 240,000 Ukrainian refugees who've come to America, and they're out there now. I can guarantee you that that demonstration that was held in New York and Washington, D.C. was organized by the Banderist movement. The organization of Ukrainian nationalism was there. The scouting camps were there. These people didn't do it because they believe in democracy. They did it because, as I said, absolute adherence to the instructions given to you by the organization. These are Nazis. These are the worst people in the world. And now they're out there, and they're going to commit acts of terrorism against the United States. This should be one of the FBI's top priorities, to nip this thing in the bud. And one of the things you need to do is get rid of the manpower. There's 240,000 enemies of the United States of America now in here called Ukrainian refugees. We don't want them here. We want them home. They need to go home, and they need to, get on with their lives. But, the war that brought them here, we want to end. We want peace. They should want peace too. So some people say we're kicking them out, sending back to a nation at war. Paul Rykov, who I've learned to despise, some guy that claims to be pro-peace, veteran, Iraq veteran, oh God, war sucks. War is horrible. We have to take care of the veteran, but we need to promote war in Ukraine as much as possible, even though over 1 million people have died. What a hypocritical son of a bitch he is. But he's out there saying we can't return them because we're sending back to. No, we want peace. They should want peace too. So we're sending them home to live their lives in peace. If we want peace and they want war and they stay here in America and they're being weaponized by the warmongers in Ukraine to punish America for this, they become the enemies of America. And I would say they've already crossed that threshold. We have to treat them preemptively as the enemies of America.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. Hey, if they want war, go back there and run into these into the Russian artillery. You know what I mean? Don't talk the talk. Don't sit here running around with a blue and yellow sign. Run into the Russian artillery and show us just how tough you are. That's what I gotta say. Oh, you want a war? We can oblige you. Go right back.
It just to show so the American people understand what's going on here. I have a relative. She is from Russia. And she came to the United States on a legitimate work visa. She did everything right. And she's in California working, adhering to the law, doing everything right. While she's there, she runs into, Ukrainians who are there, refugees. Just so you know, we are paying them a huge monthly salary to do nothing. Every single one of these 240,000 Ukrainian refugees has a lifestyle that's subsidized by the American taxpayer. She was talking how she was going out and she was getting together with friends. And they were going to pool their money to buy an old car so that they could drive to work and all this stuff. And the Ukrainians were laughing at them as they drove around in new Mercedes Benz. The Ukrainians don't have a job. They live in nice apartments. They go out for dinner, they wear nice clothes, and they drive nice cars, and you're paying for it. We're paying for it. So that's the other thing that has to come to an end. The ongoing subsidizing of sloth. I mean, if you're going to call yourself a Ukrainian patriot, okay, I don't agree with their cause, but I believe in free speech. I believe in freedom of assembly, freedom. If you want to protest in front of the United Nations or the White House, by all means, do so. Do so. And if your cause is just in your heart, I will defend your right to do it, even though I don't agree with it. I will say, no, let them protest. They must be allowed to be heard. That's the way it is. But if you're protesting while collecting a subsidy by the United States government, screw you. We brought you into our country and we allow you to live rent free and live this luscious lifestyle. And now because you're afraid of a conflict, and now we're trying to end the conflict, but you're protesting it, because what you're telling me is that you're not really caring about Ukraine people. You're saying don't end the war because we don't want our lifestyle to end. We don't want our free ride to end. Well, the free ride is over. You can demonstrate if you want, but I don't have to pay for it. I don't have to. And if you're making common cause with organizations that are receiving instructions from their Azov masters to start stockpiling tires, to create barricades, to have violent protests against America to punish us, then it's we're on a whole different playing level altogether. So don't have any sympathy for these Ukrainians out there with their flags. They're being paid by the United States government, not to demonstrate, but to live in peace. We're trying to make peace in their country, and they're against it because every Ukrainian is corrupt until the day, as long as the day is. Every single one of them. That's not true. What a horrible thing for me to say. I'm sorry. There are some that aren't. We go to a wonderful. It's called Dnipro. It's they call it a Russian food store, but it's run by Ukrainians from Lvov. Husband and wife team. Wonderful people. And they work very hard. She's a nurse. He works. They have kids, honest people. And so I apologize for that statement I made, because there are honest Ukrainians out there, American citizens who are doing the right thing as American citizens. And they may be against American policy, as their right is to be. I mean, if I were from Lvov, I would be a little unhappy about what's going on. And they have every right to express that. And these people may be against it, but they let my wife and I shop there. We don't have any issues whatsoever. We speak kindly to one another. We wish each other the best holiday wishes. And I don't view these people as actively conspiring to commit violence against America. I think if they were confronted with that, they would oppose it because they're American citizens. They're loyal to this country. That they can disagree with the policy. Look, my wife has disagreed for the last couple of decades with American policy on Georgia. She's like, I don't agree with this policy whatsoever. But you don't see her out here demonstrating against the United States government. You don't see her out there threatening violence against America. She goes to work. She does her job. We pay our taxes. And then we express ourselves as we are allowed to do through free speech. And fortunately, today, it looks like American policy is shifting in the right direction. No acts of violence on our part to do this, on her part. Just doing whatever American does. Express your right. If we're wrong on Ukraine and these Ukrainian supporters are right, keep speaking, guys. Keep speaking. Correct us. Show us the facts. Show us where we're wrong. Engage in a debate, discussion, and dialogue with us. And we'll work together to try and come up with an understanding that's fact-based, reality-based. I'm willing to do that. But what I'm not willing to do is to pay you money so you can sit here and sustain a war that, as I said, comes back to the bottom line. If you're an American, we're in a proxy war with Russia. A proxy war with Russia, two nuclear armed powers. And if this war goes the way that the trajectory naturally lends it, we'll be in a nuclear war and we all die. And that's sort of the bottom line to me. I don't want to die in a nuclear Armageddon. And I'm willing to do what is necessary to avoid that, especially if the facts align with the side that we're at war against. Now, if the Ukrainians had a case, I'd say that I'd be the first one to say we have to have a harder negotiating position with the Russians. If the Ukrainians have a case, they don't have a case. They've been in the wrong from the very get-go. They've been plotting against America from the very get-go. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, the 240,000 Ukrainian refugees, that's for done.
Yeah. Europe. They got these fruitcakes, Kaja Kallas and her ilk running around, just babbling mindlessly. Now you got Macron, Starmer, every other week he comes back with a new plan. And the new plan is the U.S. is going to be a backstop. And the answer is always no. And next week, I'm sure he'll be back with a brand new plan, completely different from the other one. But that's when the U.S. once again will be the backstop, and then Trump will say no. I don't know what this circus is about over and over and over. They met Sunday. Hey, we got an even different plan. Of course, the U.S. is going to be the backstop, and the answer is going to be no. So I guess Trump's just like, okay, I can keep doing this as long as you can, right? So now Macron, a guy who's got like the support. I mean, he can't even like have an election in his own country. His own people don't like it. That's the thing about Starmer and Macron. Oh, we're going to stand up to Russia. You can't stand up to your own population. They want you out. The European so-called leaders, they're at war with Russia. They're now at war with the Trump administration. So they're at war with the United States because the Trump administration won in a landslide. So they're at war with the U.S. They're at war with Russia. The Chinese, the global South, everybody else wants peace. They're at war with them. Their own population hates them. They're at war with their own population. Their plan was to isolate Putin. It seems to me that that's backfired. I mean, that's a massive understatement. And now we just got Macron and Starmer and a few other people supporting Zelensky. And the entire world, including their own populations, not that they haven't bamboozled their own population, so they may still be with the old, blue and yellow propaganda, but they hate them because they're hungry and their economy is going to hell. It seems to me that at some point the rug is going to get snatched out from under these clowns. I think Macron gave a speech, and it's like, I might have to put my nukes in Germany. The mighty France might have to provide the nuclear umbrella for all of Europe, and we're all got to come together. We got to build a European army. They ain't got a stinking dime. They ain't got two nickels to rub together. But they're going to build a European army. They're going to get in an arms race with Russia, and they're broke and going in the opposite direction. What the hell's going on with the likes of the Macrons and Starmers here? Your thoughts on how this ends for these mooks?
Well, I mean, it's always risky to predict the future, but sometimes the future is easily predicted. I think Macron's on his way out. I don't think he's going to be the president of France by year's end. I think Starmer is also going to face a political crisis, and a large part of it is economic. It's based on economic and social issues, immigration and things of that nature that aren't being addressed. They're being ignored, in fact, because these clowns have poured their political capital into building a reputation as the men who stood up to Putin. It's difficult to sometimes try and gauge what the Trump administration is doing because they don't tell you.
Right. Well, they usually tell you the complete opposite of what they're doing.
They're
more
all over
than not. Yeah.
We're considering this. We're going to do. We do this. But one thing I've learned in following is that the strategic trajectory tends to stay the same. There is a consistent there. So when you have the Secretary of State saying we're in a proxy war, we need peace, I use that as my guiding light. I say, okay, that's what we're heading towards. So now, what about Trump just met with Macron, he met with Starmer, and these didn't blow up into Zelensky affairs, although the Starmer one almost did. Trump humiliated him twice, but you'd think they would have learned their lesson, but instead they're doubling down on stupid with Macron's ridiculous speech on the eve of this Ukrainian security conference that's supposed to redefine. You now have the Polish president, who was used to be speaking common sense, is now saying we're in an arms race with Russia and we're going to win this arms race. I love how these guys are talking about the pacification of Russia, that implies that they're going to defeat Russia. And they're going to defeat Russia in Ukraine, which means that Ukraine, is going to be sacrificed. Back in the 90s, one of the most evil men on the planet is named George Soros, and I think most people would agree with this. But the Soros Foundation was talking about how you make NATO viable for the Americans when dealing with Russia, because it always comes down to a nuclear war. And is America willing to sacrifice Boston, Baltimore for, Leipzig or Dresden or some Polish city? And the fear amongst the Europeans was America's not going to do that. So how do we get America to existentially engage Russia without America feeling like it's going to lead to a nuclear war? And the solution, the Soros solution, was that you need to expand NATO into the former Soviet republics, and you need to identify Eastern European sources of manpower that you would then arm via the military industry of the West, so that NATO's job wasn't to put trained divisions on the ground. NATO's job was to build up military capacity that could be transferred, technology, to Eastern European manpower that would then be sacrificed on the battlefield to wear the Russians down. Now, they can see this in the 90s. That's the plan that's happening today. That's what the Ukrainian proxy conflict's all about. Eastern European manpower empowered by Western technology to wear down the Russians. And we see Europe doubling down on this. I mean, literally, they're saying that we will become the arsenal of democracy to supply the Ukrainians in perpetuity until we defeat the Russians, pacify them so that we can live in peace with the Russians. And they're not talking so much about putting troops on the ground, although there's still whispers of that. They're talking about rebuilding the defense industry. You know, we will build German tanks. Anybody who thinks it's a good idea to build German tanks to send into Ukraine to fight the Russians obviously isn't a student of history. But you know, that's what's going on here. This is a sick plan. This shows the absolute disease that has infected Europe, that they're actually going to implement to the fullest extent possible the Soros plan to sacrifice East European manpower, to sacrifice the East European nations, in this case, Ukraine. And if the Ukrainians haven't woken up to that fact yet, that they're being sacrificed, that no one cares about them, we're not doing it for you. We're doing it because we're trying to bring down Russia, because that's been the strategic objective. That's the reason why NATO exists. And if NATO is going away and Europe wants to remain relevant, they have to create a European treaty organization that assumes the mission of NATO to take on Russia, because that then allows them to say, we have a reason to be, we have a reason to exist. And they're literally defining themselves based upon this. They're willing to sacrifice social programs, pensions, everything, so that they can fund the rearmament of Europe. They're not going to be able to do it. But the problem is, as they move in that direction, they may get themselves in a bind here. And one of the biggest problems here is the nuclear thing that Macron has talked about. This is very, very dangerous. You know, France developed an independent nuclear deterrence, independent of the United States, independent of NATO, back in the 50s. And they've maintained that throughout. It's not like the British. You know, the British supposedly have an independent, but they're Trident missiles, and they don't do anything without us giving them permission to do so. The British don't have an independent nuclear deterrence. France does. 240, 250 nuclear weapons. Okay, but let's deal with the reality of this. France has said it's a French independent nuclear deterrent. Therefore, it cannot be considered in the larger context of American, European, Russian security agreements. It was left out of the INF treaty, even though the French weapons are, many of them, intermediate nuclear range weapons. It was left out of the treaty because it's an independent capability. The other thing is that France is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which prohibits the proliferation of weapon systems. Now, the United States and Russia have gotten around this by the concept of collective security arrangements. The United States via NATO, we have a NATO deterrence. Russia with Belarus has a union deterrence and all that. But you know, we get into legalities here. But what France is saying is that they will, as a sovereign state, extend their nuclear deterrence into Germany. That's a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Straight up violation of it. The other thing that happens is if France wants to assume responsibility for Europe in terms of a nuclear umbrella, then Europe's worst nightmare comes into play. Because the whole purpose of the NATO nuclear deterrence is to keep America linked in terms of nuclear doctrine to the defense of Europe. So that if Russia were to use nuclear weapons against a European city, America would retaliate and bring America in. That America, couldn't divorce itself from this. What France has just done is create an opportunity for America to do that which we should have done a long time ago, which is to eliminate the U.S.-backed NATO nuclear deterrence, get rid of the 100 B-61 bombs. We don't need them anymore. And to tell Europe, you're on your own. You're on your own. Then we do things like we tell the Germans, we're not deploying the Dark Eagle system there. We're not deploying any system in Europe. You're on your own. Oh yeah, Oreshnik. Oh, God, I'm sorry about that, guys, but that's your problem now. The Oreshnik is your problem. Any Russian nuclear weapons aimed at you is your problem, not our problem. We're going to have a nice nuclear discussion with the Russians about reducing strategic nuclear weapons, but we ain't going to touch the intermediate weapons. That's your problem. Now, France, you have to do that which you've tried to avoid since the 1950s. You've got to sit down and enter into nuclear disarmament talks with Russia. And it's not going to go well for you, France, because Russia's already got, let me just put it this way. France cannot launch a decapitation attack against Russia. Russia can decapitate France that quick. The French can't afford to get into a nuclear arms race. They don't have the budget for it, can't afford it. Europe's not going to underwrite it. France is saying we want to make our nuclear force that, but France's nuclear force isn't capable of doing that. Plus, here's the other thing, France, you threatened us, the United States of America. Now, I can't speak for Donald Trump, but I can, if I were the president of the United States, in my next nuclear posture review, I would say, I need us to start considering, we need to start targeting France and England and Europe. We have to bring them into our target deck. What does that do to our nuclear posture? What does that do to this? We can no longer view France as a friend and ally. Canada needs to be targeted too, because they're talking about linking themselves with the British nuclear deterrent to oppose us. We can't allow any nuclear-powered state to confront us. So we need to reconfigure ourselves to take out France, England. And I would just tell them, you're now part of the target deck. It's not just the Russians targeting you, it's us targeting you. Do you really want to play this game? Is this the game you really? I hear the Canadians, what if we don't buy? Because they're all Quebecois. Or they could be Newfies. Hey, making fun of the Canadians now because that's a politically correct thing to do. I love the Canadians, Great White North. But they are saying stupid things like, well, what if we just don't buy American fighter planes? Well, what if we just don't protect your stupid, pathetic little country? You have one of the smallest militaries in NATO, and you only exist because we guarantee your airspace. Do you really want to take control of the Canadian airspace? Because you know what we'll do? We'll tell the Russians, hey, there's a big gap over the North Pole that's called Canada. Feel free to fly your airplanes into Canada and bomb the living shit out of them. We don't care. Just stay away from Alaska, stay away from Maine, and don't come near the Dakota border. But feel free to bomb Canada because Canada can't protect itself. Canada doesn't have an air force. They don't have anything. Canada has to understand you don't bite the hand that feeds you. We are the only reason why you have had not to bankrupt yourself militarily. We cover everything. We protect you. And you want to declare your independence? Be aware of what you ask for. And that's what Europe's going to find out too. Because if they have this meeting, they start talking about the creation of a European treaty organization. I have a funny feeling that Donald Trump's going to say, I'll help you. I'll make this really easy. We're out of NATO. Now you have a European treaty organization. You can rename Brussels, call it ETO instead of NATO. But you're on your own. The billions of dollars that are spent every year making fat Europeans fatter who work for NATO, doing nothing, by the way. They just sit there and it's just a made up, or it's literally Doge could go in there into the NATO organization and have a field day, fire everybody, and NATO wouldn't even miss them because these are just jobs that exist as sinecures for the politically enfranchised elite of Europe. We're not going to pay for that anymore. In fact, we already defunded ourselves from that. We're not doing the civil side of NATO anymore. That's up to NATO to do. But we'll pull out of the military side. Poland. I mean, what a stupid thing for the Polish guy to say. We'll withdraw Fifth Corps forward. We'll withdraw the brigade. We'll withdraw everything. You'll be on your own. totally on your own. Germany will be on its own. Netherlands will be on its own. Belgium will be on its own. Italy will be on its own. All these European nations have grown accustomed to having big brother America there for you, holding your hand through thick or thin. You'll be on your own.
Well, you know the worst part of that, Scott? Here's the worst part of it. If we did all of that, they'd say, oh my God, we're on our own. The Russians are going to attack us now. The Russians would say, oh, no, we're not. And it would be proven that the whole time, all this crap about we've got to come together and defend ourselves, because if we are vulnerable for 1 second, the hordes of Russians will come across the border and attack us. And they'd be like, oh no, we're going to be vulnerable. The Russians are surely going to take advantage of that attack. And the Russians be like, why? We don't even like you guys anymore. Get out of the way from here with your stinking baguettes. No, we're not interested. Sorry. We'll be over here talking to the Africans. We're talking to the Asian, the Chinese, and we get the India. We got stuff going on with them.
The Americans.
The Americans. How about that? We don't have time for you. Not only do we not want to attack you, we don't even want to talk to you. We don't like you. Go away. Stay away. They're like, the Russians want to attack us. The Russians are like, we don't really want anything to do with you. Go away. That's the worst thing that could happen to these so-called European leaders. And might I add, most of them won't be in power long enough to execute any of these great plans for in the next 6 months to a couple of years. They'll all be gone. For these great plans that they have are going to be voted out with them. But even if they did that, their worst case scenario is that they are put in a position where the Russians could attack them, and the Russians just say, please leave us alone.
But again, I just want to push back a little bit on that.
Okay.
Because people say the Russians could attack them. Russia's in no position to attack them. People, please look at the Ukraine conflict and look at the line of contact and how many Russian troops have to exist to fight along that line of contact. It's not the whole Russian army there, but it's a significant chunk. And that's offensive operations, and it's bloody going for them. Now, what you're saying is that Russia, which is successfully executing this war, but it's not like it's hassle free. The Russians are working right now. They're not relaxing. That Russia is now going to triple the line of contact to engage in high intensity conflict with NATO members who will be able to at least sustain the burnout for a while. Russia doesn't have the troops to do that. Russia would have to literally mobilize another 5 to 7 million troops to carry out the kind of offensive operations that people are talking about. The Russian buildup in response to Finland becoming a member of NATO was 70,000. That's a defensive buildup.
Right.
The reinforcement to Kaliningrad is defensive in nature. The Russian cooperation with Belarus is defensive in nature. And when Russia finishes this conflict in Ukraine, the troops there will fall back to defensive positions. That's what the Russians do. They're going to defend their land. Russia's not attacking anybody, and any military expert who knows about war and how war is fought will tell you that even if Russia wanted to, and even if Putin, for this to be the case, Putin would have to become Macron.
He'd have to mobilize his entire economy. The entire country, economy, everything would have to be mobilized towards nothing but attacking Europe. And why the hell would he want to do that?
They don't want to do that. I mean, it's not in their, it's literally Russia gains nothing from it. It would actually, to be honest, destroy Russia.
Yeah.
Because the only way Russia could get away with attacking Europe is if Europe attacked first, and then Russia went into World War II mode, which said sacrifice everything to achieve victory on the front line. We will suffer whatever losses we need to suffer, but we're going to roll through and put the bayonet through the heart of the fascist enemy. But that's not going to happen by Russia attacking Europe. The Russian people won't support that. Nobody in Russia would support that. It's not. No one's talking about it. And they don't have the capability of doing it. That's the other thing. They simply lack the capacity to launch offensive operations against NATO that are capable of, taking Warsaw, Berlin, Paris. This is all, blogosphere fantasy. Putin's not looking to do that. No one's looking to do that.
And from the looks of things, I got a funny feeling the Germans ain't going to be coming across the Slowiecki Gap anytime soon, attacking Russia, because they're running around with literally. They don't. If you read the article, and they had, if you read this article, the incident took place during exercises for NATO's rapid response, formed in reaction to the Ukraine crisis. You go down here. Troops were missing 31% of their machine guns, 41% of their handguns, more than 3/4 of their night divisions. Soldiers reported to painting broomsticks black and attaching them to boxer armored vehicles to simulate gun barrels. They go on to say the shortage of handguns and machine guns have since been rectified. Yeah, right. A spokesman said it emerged last month that the German military were also using ordinary Mercedes vans as stand-ins for armored personnel carriers during trainage because so, you know, and looking at that, I got a funny feeling the Germans ain't going to be attacking anybody anytime soon with broomsticks and Mercedes Sprinter vans. I don't think that's the way they want to go to the front.
Look, Germany has a problem right now. They have an arrangement with Lithuania where they've promised to put in a brigade. The brigade will be 3 battalions in strength. One of the battalions is an international battalion. So Germany doesn't have to worry about arming that battalion, et cetera. But the other 2 battalions are German battalions. And, you know, one of the problems, there's 2 things. Getting German personnel to be permanently stationed outside of Germany, there's a constitutional problem. So any German soldier that signs up has to sign a contract specifically to be deployed to Lithuania. And given the state of affairs right now, I don't think you're going to find 5,000 German soldiers willing to commit suicide. But even if they do, now they have to equip them. They don't have the equipment for this. We're talking about they're going to have to cannibalize existing units to bring together the resources necessary to bring up to speed these 2 battalions so that they can deploy. And it's uncertain whether they'll be able to do that by 2027, 2028, 2030, or 2030, or ever. And at the same time, you have Germany saying that we're going to become the arsenal of democracy. We're going to start punching out German tanks like you wouldn't believe. With what steel and you know,
and what energy? What energy are they going to run the factories with?
Yeah, you don't have any gas to run the furnaces, so this is just fantasy, a fantasy world that they live in. You know, it's almost sad to see nations sink to this level.
Yeah, I think you're right. The last and as far as, let me add this, also their aircraft, according to this. Now, keep in mind, this is the Atlantic Council. These are the people. This is NATO's think tank, literally saying, here we go. There we go. It emerged in a parliamentary report last year that only 42 of Germany's 109 Typhoon fighters are available for immediate use because of maintenance issues. Only 38 of his 89 Tornado bombers are operational, along with only 280 of the armor's tanks. Right. Another parliamentary report last month said German special forces had to pull out of a NATO joint exercise because there was no operational helicopter. Single. They don't have a helicopter in the whole country. Not one. So, I mean, the idea that Macron and these other clowns are running around with all this fat talk about how you're going to build an army. Okay, talk about starting from scratch. They don't even have scratch. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, if you had an army. Meanwhile, the Russian machine is just putting stuff out, doing what it does, like a normal country would be expected to do. These are not normal countries anymore. They got broomsticks. They don't got the country, the Wehrmacht, does not have a single operational helicopter, and they got broomsticks. I guess, of course, they can rearm themselves because all they got to do is go to like Walmart or maybe IKEA or something. You can get a lot of broomsticks, but they're just not effective at defeating the. I mean, I don't understand.
But it's worse than that, Garland. You're just talking about equipment. But what makes the equipment come to life and become lethal? Manpower. The Germans have forgotten what it means to be German. in some ways, that's a good thing. I
think
don't
they've
know.
forgotten what it's. Look, I think they've forgotten what it's like to be a man, also, because they got in trouble describing whether that's a man or a woman they're
Well,
fighting.
it's a different issue altogether. But my point is this: let's look at the United States Army. Pete Hegseth has come in, and he speaks about wanting to increase the lethality of the U.S. military. And all the peaceniks are, oh, that's terrible. Guys, if you don't understand that the best way to guarantee that America isn't attacked is to have the most lethal military in the world, so that if we have to go down into the basement and unlock the cages and let the beasts out, they're going to eat everything in their path. I prefer to keep the guys in the basement, throwing them raw meat for a 20-year career, never let them fight, but they have to be the best trained. The United States Army a while ago took out the bayonet training, the bayonet obstacle course. Now, anybody who's been through the military, bayonet training is it's what brings the reality of hand-to-hand combat home. Driving a bayonet, thrusting it in, twisting it, the butt stroke, the slash, the thrust.
We saw that fight, the one with the Russian guy who got in a fight and it got down to a knife fight. When it came down to it, it was hand-to-hand combat.
It's about hand-to-hand combat, and you have to not just have it has to be ingrained into you. Because the one thing I learned in going through multiple iterations of the bayonet course is that you can't just go through it emotions. I mean, they're do your war face. Get back there, do it again. What's your problem? And you got to approach it. You want to kill. You're viewing the tires as the enemy. You're just going through. You're screaming, and that's what they want, because combat is bloodlust. It's at that moment when you're basically going to kill a human being. And the Army took it out, which means you're no longer a lethal force. The Marine Corps has always kept the bayonet course in there because we understand the importance of hand-to-hand combat and the killer instinct. If you're going to be a Marine, you have to be willing and capable and able, when called upon to take a human life violently. I'm sorry for all the peaceniks out there. That's just the way it is. But the Army forgot that. The Germans can't fight. They don't know how to fight. The French have some physically fit people, but they're not fighters either. They got some foreign legionnaires that are tough, and they go through that, but there's a small number of them. They're poorly equipped. But the bottom line is Europe doesn't have an army capable of killing. And that's the reality. The Russians ran into this problem. Marat Karelin is a journalist, a combat journalist, who writes a very good Substack. I'd advise everybody to go and subscribe to it. It's free. Tremendous reporting from the front lines. But he talked about how he used to report on he's part of this Voyenkorps, the military correspondence that that we talked about earlier. He said, he used to go to the Donbass and report on the fighting, and he'd hang out with the Donbass volunteers and the militia. And, he said they learned how to become killers. I mean, and survivors. I mean, they did it for 8 years, but he always viewed them as sort of the B team. Wait till the Russian army comes in. He'd say, wait till the Russian army comes in. They'll show you how it's done. And then when the special military operation kicked off, he literally told his guys, watch this now, watch. And the Russian army came in and ran into ambushes, overextended their lines of communication, were getting hit with artillery, and they were dying. And all the Donbass guys are going, they don't know how to fight. I mean, they can maneuver, but they're doing stuff that's just going to get them killed. And that's the reality. You can train all you want, but if your training isn't realistic, if your training doesn't take into account the realities of the battlefield, you're just training to die. Now, the Russian army quickly adapted. I think even the biggest critics of the Russians have said they're the quickest learners in the world. Boom, whoa, stop. Take the guys that survived, take them to the academy, debrief them, figure out what's going on, bring them back here, train up, and keep going. And the Russian army has been adapting. The Russian army today is the most lethal fighting force in the world. Not because they all look like Delta Force and they run and go, hoo, 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 because they know how to kill. And not just know how to kill, they can kill in a moment. They don't have to think. If there is a meeting engagement, which is the classic initial, engagement of any war where armies are moving towards each other, and they make contact. If you've seen the movie Gettysburg,
Yep.
Okay, you remember with Buford's cavalry, you've got Heath's division coming in, and so they're going to deploy, and you're going to force them to commit and line up and fight. That meeting engagement, and there's always hesitancy because you're going from, hey, we're marching, we're happy, we're eating, we're this. All of a sudden, bullets are flying, we're shooting, and if you hesitate, the enemy gets an advantage. No, the Russians don't hesitate anymore. The meeting engagement comes in, they see you, they kill you. Could you imagine a German force full of fat, schnitzel eating, beer drinking, people who don't want to fight, who don't know how to kill, aren't conditioned to kill? They're like, oh, it's peacetime. We're going to maintain our Mercedes-Benz engine. Da, 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 da. Oh, look, Russians. What do we? Boom, you're dead. Because the Russians saw you and they killed you that quick. They killed you that quick. You're like, well, should I call my command and control? Too late. Jammed. Airplane's over. Boom, you're dead. Why? Because the Russians have been playing this game for 3 years. There's no hesitation. They know exactly what needs to be done. They see you, they fix you, they kill you. End of story. And there's no force in the West, including the United States, that can do that. We're not going to. The Marine Corps tries, but the Marine Corps hasn't fought a high intensity war in a long time, and we will make mistakes because there's a limit to what your training can do to you. There's a great book called America's First Battles. And it talks about through history how America always loses the first battle of the war. Why? We don't know what the hell we're doing. We just go in there and we were like, boom, we get hit. But we learn, we adapt. Rick Ackerson wrote a great book, a trilogy about the great books about the U.S. Army at war in World War II. In the first volume, Pulitzer Prize winning volume, An Army at Dawn, talks about how you create this peacetime army. Then you sent it to North Africa, and we go through the cauldron in North Africa. And then it came time to go to Sicily, and we did Sicily. But now we're going to go into Italy. And he finishes it by saying the inexperienced boys that were brought in North Africa, who suffered so greatly at Kasserine Pass, who blundered so mightily in Sicily. He said, the Germans, you needed to feel sorry for the Germans because these boys had turned into men, cold, hard, murderous, killing men. And all they knew was death, and all they wanted was death because they understood that only through death could they go home, that the only way to get to home was to kill everything in front of you. And they were now prepared for the first time to do that. The transition, but it took North Africa, it took Sicily. The Russian army has spent 3 years in the dying fields, the killing fields of Ukraine. They understand right now that the only way to get home is to kill everything in front of them. And they are ready, able, and willing to do that. And there's no army in the world right now that is that same mentality, especially none of these NATO militaries.
Well, this shirt here is from the police academy. We train people in the academy, 6 months in the academy, and then you go out with an officer, a training officer for 6 months, and then you come back to the academy, right? And, everybody knows, this from when you go out and they go to that training officer, what the training officer is going to say, forget that bullshit you heard in the academy.
That's right.
This is how we do things out here. Oh, I've got to fill out the bullshit. This is what we got to do to get the job done, right? And when that guy came back in 6 months, he wasn't the same guy that you sent out. He was not the same guy. He was, as you said, he knew what to do. He knew when to do it. He didn't stop. He didn't blah, blah. You know what I mean? He was prepared to do what he had to do, right? The first time, like our guys that went out and checked hunters, right? And you're walking up and there's a bunch of guys, literally, think about this. There's some guys that are hunting in the woods and they got guns, and you walk up to them to check their hunter's license, and they turn around and their barrels point towards you. They don't realize that they don't stop. Oh, there's an officer going to check my license, and they turn around and you go like this, Mo, hey dude, yeah, put this thing down, and then you start to learn when you walk up to people, you tell them barrels down, blah, blah, blah. You start to realize, and so these guys now, they got a different mentality. You're doing things where they're checking hunters and they walk up and they, hey, barrels down, guys, barrels down, as they're walking up so we don't have accidents. All those things, the only way they could learn is by doing it. And so even I would say this, a bunch of Russians come in and they see people, the way they're targeting. the targeting goes up. Who gets the targeting? Who decides what to do? All of that. All of those people have done it every single day, every single day. So if you spot these Russians and they spot you, and you got to target them, they're gonna that quest. They're gonna know. Well, this is better for drones. No artillery. We need bombs for this. Have this one where you're like calling somebody. Oh, we need targeting for blah blah blah. Well, should we send artillery or drones? I don't know. What do you think? You're dead by then, because the decision was made. When they saw you, they knew what the best thing to do was, and they called it. And when the guy heard their voice, he looked up. This is where they are. Boom, called. You're done. So what they can do.
You take a look at the guy on the artillery line. You know, peacetime artillery. You call in the grid coordinates, and they're like, you know, guy calls it out, guy cranks it in, calls it out, confirms, da 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 da. And that's all fine. That's how you get trained. But what the Russians have learned is that if you take too long doing that, the counter battery fire comes in and you're dead. And so watch the Russians. Bam, round out, gone. No wasted moves. You know, when the Gulf War started, or when Saddam invaded Kuwait, I was in the amphibious warfare school, which is the captain's course for Marine officers. And, you know, that's where you're supposed to learn how to be, you know, to do, you know, company and battalion sized operations. And, you know, we had these teams that, you know, your class team, then you'd have a major who would run you through tactical problems, and you'd be on the board and you're doing all this. Well, I got pulled out of that because I had some certain expertise, and I was sent to a special planning cell for amphibious operations during the war, run by the commandant. And then I ended up going to the war itself and doing counter scout operations with Delta Force and all these crazy people. And I came back, and I remember coming back to the amphibious warfare school. The school was still going. And, you know, I used to be one of that crowd that was on the board doing the thing. I came back and I just to say hi, but I walked through it. Just my little experience, just that experience in reality. And I remember Major Duncan, he was the major running the thing. He just said, whatever the hell they did to you, we got to figure out how to package that, because you were good when you were here as a student, but what you're doing right now, just the ease in which you make decisions, the ease in which, you know, you cut through the bull, you get to what needs to be done, you know, because you did it in war, you did it in real life, you did it where if there were mistakes, you know, so you learned how to not make mistakes and all that. That's just a small, I mean, gosh, you know, my war was from January 15th until, you know, March 2nd. Not very long, short war, a lot of trained up beforehand, but the actual stuff that counts was that period of time. And it made me from being a good Marine to a great Marine because of just that. Just imagine if you do that for 3 years now. These Russians are doing it for 3 years.
It's a well-oiled machine. It's a well-oiled machine.
The efficiency of their operation, making everything work. This is why I always laugh when they're going, well, the Russians are launching human wave assaults. I don't think so.
No.
Now, does it mean that look, everybody makes mistakes, you know, and the Ukrainians have been doing it too. Remember, they've got their guys who have been doing it for 3 years too, and they're pretty damn good too. So, you know, every once in a while they get an upper hand on the Russians tactically. That's why we get the video of, you know, Russian tanks coming in and suddenly get hit and all that, because the Russians thought they had suppressed drone capabilities, but they didn't. The drone capabilities came up. The Ukrainians were successful in shielding some javelins and all this. So the Russians, you know, learned their lesson. They lost that engagement. But, you know, both sides right now are extraordinarily lethal. And if you make a mistake, you die. And what is social Darwinism? You know, survival of the fittest. And what we've seen is we've seen social Darwinism on a massive scale taking place in the special military operation, so that the people on both sides that are coming out of this are the best there are, literally the best there are.
Well, we got to go, but although there's one thing. So if we can just do 5 minutes before we go, I think this is important, right? They're talking about it in the chat. All right, so there we've got it. Gaza ceasefire talks between U.S. and Hamas reportedly near transition to second stage, right? Let me just say this. there ain't no way in the hell the Biden administration would ever, ever, ever meet with Hamas. Number one. Number two, I bet you Netanyahu and his people are going ape shit over that, furious. But I got to say this: if you want to get a deal, it's pretty smart to meet. I mean, let's just say this: after, like, when they started exchanging hostages, I looked, and there was literally thousands of Hamas guys out there with new guns and all that, and I'm like, well, they didn't lose. So when it comes to, I'm just going to say this again. I'm not here to pump up Trump. He's doing lots of things that I'm furious about and don't like. But it seems smart to me that, like, that's something that these ideologues, they call Trump an ideologue, these ideologues would never talk to Hamas. How the hell do you get a deal if you don't talk to Hamas? I think it's surprising that the U.S. would ever do that, but extremely wise. Your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I'm not ignoring you. I'm trying to find the response. You know, Trump yesterday sent out this post, and it's relevant to what we're saying. You know, it starts off, "Shalom Hamas," means hello and goodbye. "You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all the dead bodies you murdered. It's over for you. Only sick and twisted people, blah, 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 blah. You know, if you don't do as I say, I have just met with your former hostages whose lives you've destroyed. This is your last warning. For the leadership, now is the time to leave Gaza." Important thing, for the leadership, now is the time to leave Gaza while you still have a chance. "And to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits, but not if you hold hostages. If you do, you are dead. Make a smart decision. Release the hostages now. There will be hell to pay later." And I looked at that and I went, "You're deranged, literally deranged." But then I sat back and I went, no, what this means is he's talking to Hamas.
There it is. During talks between Trump's hostage envoy, Hamas, and representatives from Egypt and Qatar. You know what I don't see? I don't see Israel in there.
Israel's not there at all. And then, you know, the funny thing is that the Arab League met in Cairo, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and they came up, they put meat on the bones of their counter proposal to Trump's, you know, we're going to depopulate. And Trump immediately came out and said, no, we're not going to accept that. But they will accept it. And there will be
but that's a negotiation, isn't it? A negotiation is do this. No, I won't. How about this? No, I won't. That's a negotiation.
You know, Colonel McGregor, who I have great, Douglas McGregor, I have great respect for. You know, he's saying, watch out. We are on the cusp of a major Middle East war. I mean, the United States just flew 2 B-52s down there. The Israelis are flying next to them. But all that tells me is that Trump is posturing while behind the scenes there's negotiations taking place. You have the Iranians coming out and saying no to negotiations. We will never negotiate. Well, the last time they said no to negotiations and they were never negotiating, Jake Sullivan was in Qatar negotiating with the Iranians about the next nuclear deal. I think that the
Russians now are saying they'll negotiate for the
Iranians, right? To be on board with this and help us with that. Until which time American bombs are falling on Middle Eastern targets, I will continue to believe that Trump's strategic objective is peace in the Middle East, not war. And that all of these statements, which give me heartburn, have to be treated as a negotiating ploy until proven otherwise. And I'm given heart to this by pointing out that that's exactly what's happening today with Ukraine, that Trump is working very hard to get a peaceful resolution to this. And if he's that committed to peace in Europe, I believe he's as equally committed to peace in the Middle East. And that, but it's a different game in the Middle East. There's different problem sets. There's the Israelis that he has to, suppress. And to be honest, there's the Arabs that he has to motivate. I mean, and how do you motivate the Arabs? I think Trump's thing is to get in their face. No more, well, we're going to give you more aid. We're going to do you this. Because the Arabs have never responded to that other than to put the aid in their pockets and still be. But you need the Arabs to commit. And for the first time, the Arab League got together and committed. Now Trump's still pushing them because he wants more commitment from them, a total commitment. He needs a total commitment to peace on the part of the Arab League and the part of Hamas, on Iran, everybody. And Israel, again, did you watch the it wasn't the State of the Union address, but the presentation to the combined houses of Congress. He didn't mention Israel once.
Yeah, that's weird. That's
Didn't
rare.
mention Israel once. So,
and he didn't really posture against China like they normally do. You know what I mean?
China's another one that we're seeing a whole bunch of stupid talk and all that stuff. We see, China, if you want a trade war, we'll give you trade. If you want this war, we'll give you that. Whatever war you want, we'll give you that. And Peake had Seth, if you want peace, prepare for war and all that. But I think behind the scenes, there's Trump people reaching out to the Chinese going, of course, we don't want war. Let's figure out.
It's obvious, right? Well, one thing's obvious before we go. It's obvious that Trump don't want a war. A period. That he does not. That's like Trump has some plans. You can agree with them or disagree with them, but he's got economic plans and plans for here and whatever. You can agree with whatever. But it appears to me that part of his major plan is not to have a war and to focus on the other stuff that he's doing. Whether you can, then we can argue about whether it's right or wrong or good or bad. The one thing I had Dr. Jack Rasmus on, and he talked about, can Trump he's got a really legitimately $1 trillion tax cut for the middle class, $500 billion for Social Security no longer being taxed, no tips being taxed, and no Social Security, no tips, and some overtime tax, right? Which is a middle class tax cut that's what Trump wants to get done. But I don't see that he wants to go to war with Iran or China. His actions, he talks a lot of crap. I said from the very beginning, you got to ignore everything this guy says and judge and figure out what he's going to do. There's hints in what he says. And usually it's the opposite. But this guy right now has a plan, and it ain't bombing anybody. It's like ending that crap because it would get in the way of his economic plan. It would screw his economic plan up. How can you have a war against Iran and get the price of gas down? It ain't going to happen.
Yeah. And this whole economic plan he has is predicated on lower energy costs. They're not going to go to 45, but I'm saying they should drop maybe into the high 60s for the price of barrel, for a barrel of oil. If you have a war with Iran,
it's over.
The price is going to go up to 120, 150, and it's going to be forever. It's never going to recover. That's the end of everything you're planning to do. And
ended your presidency. You've ended your presidency.
Yeah, and ended the MAGA movement
immediately.
Yeah. The whole thing about MAGA is to convince the American people that changing the paradigm on how we interface with the world away from a militaristic approach to an economic approach is in the best interest of the American people. And the only way you do that is to abide by James Carville, maxim. It's the economy, stupid. And that everything that goes on, it should start off with, how does this help our economy? It doesn't. I don't want to talk about it. Next. And war doesn't help the economy.
I think you're right. Scott Ritter. Everybody, don't forget, go to scottritter.com for all of his good works. And, of course, The Russia House. That's a great program he has going on. That is on Telegram. Scott, they can find the info there they can find info at scottritter.com for The Russia House, right? Yeah. Yep. So you can join there. Cost a few beans, but not that much. And of course, you can donate on Scott's channel. Don't forget, you got everything going across the bottom here. Become a Patreon member. You can donate on PayPal, buy me a coffee, whatever the case may be. If you can afford it, even if you can't, who cares? Just share this on all your social media platforms. 1,899 people. That means we should have 1,899 likes. Anybody who isn't subscribed, subscribe. Everybody's got to share this. There's a little join button if you can afford to join. That's $3 or $4, whatever. Do that. But make sure you subscribe. We're out.